Did you know that there was once a band leader who was dubbed as the Martin Luther King of music by his fellow ragtime contemporaries? Stick around with me, Technical Sergeant Gregory Pflugh, saxophonist with the United States Air Force Band of Flight, as we highlight American military music pioneers in our Black History Month feature on Lieutenant James Reese Europe and the 369th Infantry Regiment Band. James Reese Europe was born on February 22, 1881 in Mobile, Alabama, and subsequently moved to Washington, D.C. before settling in New York City in 1904. He was an early ragtime and jazz band leader, arranger, and composer, and became a leading voice in the African-American scene in the 1910s. He organized a society for Black Americans in the music industry called the Clef Club, which not only played music written solely by Black composers, but also served as a union and a booking agency for Black musicians, eventually numbering over 200 in its ranks. From this group, he created the Clef Club Orchestra and made history when the group performed a concert of Negro music on May 2, 1912, to benefit the Colored Music Settlement School. This group was the first ever to perform the earliest forms of jazz at Carnegie Hall. Europe was at the height of the era and co-composed 9 musical works with Ford Dabney, an acclaimed American ragtime pianist, composer, and director of bands for Broadway, musical theater, and vaudeville. James Reese Europe received a commission into the New York National Guard, where he fought with the 369th Infantry Regiment. This segregated unit became known for being one of the first African American regiments to serve with the American Expeditionary Forces during World War I, earning the nickname the Black Rattlers. Although many African Americans were eager to fight in the war, initially they were not accepted into service because of their race. Once the United States realized they did not have enough soldiers to support the cause, the country passed the Selective Service Act of 1917, which required all men from the ages of 21 to 30 to register for the draft, including African Americans. Unfortunately, this decision was not welcomed by all in the ranks. The U.S. Army decided in April of 1918 to assign the unit to the French Army during the war because many white American soldiers refused to perform combat duty with blacks. The regiment was issued French supplies, but still wore their U.S. uniforms. Luckily, the French did not show hatred or racially segregate the 369th. In fact, they became highly respected by their allies and adversaries alike, earning the nickname the Men of Bronze from the French, and also the nickname the Hellfighters from the Germans. The Hellfighters proved themselves in 191 days of continuous combat, suffering 1,500 dead and wounded, more than any other American unit. They were also the first French, British, or American soldiers to reach the Rhine River at the end of the war on November 26, 1918. Over 170 individual members of the regiment received the French War Cross, and a unit citation was awarded to the entire unit by distinguishing themselves by acts of heroism involving combat with the enemy. Lieutenant James Reese Europe went on to direct the regimental band to great acclaim. In February and March of 1918, James Reese Europe and his military band traveled over 2,000 miles in France, performing for British, French, and American military audiences as well as French civilians. The 369th Regiment Hellfighters Band was relied upon not only in battle, but also for morale. By the end of their tour, they became one of the most famous military bands throughout Europe. They followed the 369th Regiment overseas and were highly regarded and known for being able to immediately boost morale. The 369th Regiment Band is widely credited for introducing early jazz to Europe. So one of the things I really respect about Lieutenant James Reese Europe and how he wrote is that he used a lot of syncopation and what would kind of become a predecessor to ragtime and also swing. And so you'd see in the melodies that he would write when you listen to it, a lot of dotted 8th, 16th figures that would be a lot more prevalent than some of the other types of marches at the time. Also, you'd have a very busy bass line that would almost kind of shadow and be a precursor to what the bass would become in overall jazz movements. And then as you also listen to some of the music that they play, you can hear some of the idiosyncratic effects that some of the instruments have. So you'll hear trumpets doing some growling noises, and you'll also hear some slide trombone effects. And if you also listen to some of the woodwind lines, you'll hear them scooping into some of the notes that they play, which became something that was very heavily featured during the swing era as well. And then you also hear some of the different ragtime beats in the percussion section to help emphasize the overall groove. Another thing that I really appreciated about James Reese Europe and the Hellfighter Band is that, much like the Air Force bands do today, they centered around boosting morale. And so they went out to some of the foreign audiences that they had, like the French at the time, and they would go play not only for the French soldiers, but also for the French civilian and the people, because they knew that using that and harnessing that soft power would be able to help humanize both their allies and everyone involved in the war. And so they used that universal language of music to really build those bonds that would end up proving very vital on the battlefield. At the end of the war, the 369th returned to New York City, and on 17 February 1919 they paraded through the city. This day became an unofficial holiday of sorts for all of Harlem. Many black school children were dismissed from school so that they could attend the parade. With the addition of many of the adults, there were thousands upon thousands of people that lined the streets to see the 369th Regiment. The parade became a marker for African American service to the nation and a frequent point of reference for those campaigning for civil rights in later times. In the 1920s and the 1930s, the 369th was a regular presence on Harlem streets, each year marching through the neighborhood from their armory to catch a train to their annual summer camp, and then back through the neighborhood on their return 2 weeks later. 2 monuments have been built in honor of the Hellfighters. The first memorial was built in 1997 and stands in northern France, where the 369th soldiers distinguished themselves during the liberation of the town during World War I. A second monument was unveiled on September 29, 2006, on the 88th anniversary of that battle. It is in the form of an obelisk and is 12 feet high, and features gilded inscriptions, the 369th's crest, and its coiled rattlesnake insignia. The U.S. Army also finally made the Hellfighters designation official in September 2020, cementing their legacy of valor. Lieutenant Europe is also fondly remembered. His contemporary, U.B. Blake, a trailblazer in his own rights for co-writing and directing one of the first African-American Broadway musicals, said of James Reese Europe, and I quote, "He was our benefactor and our inspiration. Even more, he was the Martin Luther King of music." Europe earns his praise by being an unflagging innovator, not only in his compositions and orchestrations, but in his organizational ability and leadership. We hope that you enjoyed our highlight on Lieutenant James Reese Europe and the Harlem Hellfighters, as well as all of our contents highlighting the significant achievements and contributions of African American service members during Black History Month. Once again, I'm Technical Sergeant Gregory Pflugh with the United States Air Force Band of Flight, and we hope to look forward to performing for you very, very soon. Thank you for tuning in, and have a great day.